Right, welcome everybody again to the fourth in the four-part series of the Workers' International Conference Network Conference. You're all very welcome once again. We're represented by comrades from all over the world, which is absolutely fantastic and is a real a show of international solidarity. And also the forum to share ideas. So we've got two items on the agenda now. We're continuing from last week. We've got the adoption of the Wind Manifesto, which Finn is going to introduce for us. So we've got the manifesto. We've got as far as I know, there are 2 submitted amendments at the moment. I don't know if anybody knows of any more, or you can submit from the floor if you want to. And then the second part will be to do with the formation of a political committee. So we're not sure whether it will take 3 hours. We'll just have to see how it goes. So basically, Roger, have we got any other amendments apart from the one from Rob and the one from Aman?
No, not so far. But
no, okay.
Say, if anybody wants to move an amendment, they still have the chance.
That's right, yeah. So, sorry, just forgot who's. Is it Dave that's leading this one off? No, Finn. How long do you want to speak for, Finn?
15 minutes. Well, comrades, the purpose of the discussion on the manifesto is to try and make concrete and turn into reality some of the discussions that we've been having around the prospectus document 2020 and the supplement. It's an urgent question. It's not something that we put off this in the future. It's an urgent question. The organization that organizations are trying to create, and we need to make progress in the direction of socialism in the immediate term. 1 million people have died of COVID. Hundreds of thousands have died in the United States, in Brazil, in India, places like that. In Britain, now there's a huge number of people dying. And I read recently a report from Oxfam which showed that in Ireland, the top 9 billionaires made an extra 3.8 billion euro in the last year. And 1/10 of that additional amount, not their personal wealth, the additional amount they made in the past year would have paid for every single person in this country to be vaccinated. So that's the situation we're facing. We're in an irrational situation. I think Roger pointed this point about what's reasonable is rational. It's unreasonable that such huge amounts of money are being made on the one hand, while there's such deprivation and poverty on the other hand. The Food and Agriculture Organization said recently that 11 countries have a dire famine situation at the present time. And that coexists with big companies in the fashion trade, like, for instance, Gucci and Givenchy, who destroy their stock from year to year rather than sell it at a discount. And Burberry, the fashion house, in 2018 destroyed 38 million euro worth of stock. So you can see then the urgency to have ways in which the workers and other oppressed sections of society can organize. And that's what the manifesto is aimed at, creating conditions, summarizing our general position, so to make conditions possible for new organizations of the class to emerge. Again, the point was made in earlier discussions about COVID being linked to capitalist development, particularly agribusiness and the big farming corporations in the United States, North Carolina, huge amounts of swine and hogs. In China, lakes which contain thousands of ducks. In fact, the Chinese export 2.2 billion or produce 2.2 billion chickens every year. So there's enormous dangers in the present way in which society is going. And the manifesto tries to draw together ways in which you can summarize the situation that we face and summarize ways in which we can advance. Now, the world is dominated by a handful of monopolies, and some of those capitalist monopolies have larger incomes than entire countries across the globe. So the individual countries are significant, of course. We can talk about America, we can talk about China, about Germany, Japan, other big companies, Brazil, other big countries. But by and large, the entire globe is dominated by multinational corporations. And the decisions that governments make are in response to the needs of these big multinational corporations. So we focus on that aspect of it rather than country by country. And the manifesto, as it's written, doesn't take each country individually and go through it, but makes a general statement that capitalist monopolies dominate the globe, and the decisions that are made in a global sense reflect the needs of monopolies. Now, there are better ways to run society, as we know. Comrades might have heard of Mike Cooley, who worked in Lucas Aerospace in the early 70s. He died recently. He's an Irishman from Tuam. But the Combined Shop Stewards Committee in Lucas Aerospace near Birmingham developed an alternative plan. So when Lucas Aerospace was being closed down, the workers, the shop stewards, drew up a plan, an alternative plan, where the skills that the workers had learned in arms production, because Lucas Aerospace is a big arms producer, could be devoted to socially useful purposes, one of which was the production of kidney machines. Now, as it happens, Lucas Aerospace also produced kidney machines as well as armaments. And the plan drew up all kinds of suggestions in which the skills of the workers in Lucas Aerospace, the Combined Shop Stewards Committee drew this up, the decided ways in which the skills of the workers could be used for socially useful purposes. So all the material is there for us to show that it's necessary that we act urgently, first of all in terms of our ideas and our perspectives, but also in organizational terms. And I want to raise this question because why is it, if it's all so reasonable and so obvious, that we don't have socialism now? Why is capitalism still in existence when all these immense and stark contradictions face us? Now, we've had socialist or social democratic or Labour governments across the globe for 100 years. There's been a socialist government in France, in Spain, in Italy, in Britain. The Workers' Party in Brazil has been in power since 2003. It's been 13 years in power under Lula da Silva, 13 years in power. So why is it we don't have socialism now, if that's the case? We also had huge movements in Chile and other countries. So why are we still in this situation where the most stark demands have been made of people? It's a life and death situation for many. And yet these parties who have been in power didn't solve the problems. We also have huge organizations developing across the globe. The Black Lives Matter is one. There's many more. In Russia just recently, you could see just today and last week, 20,000 people turned out last week to demonstrate. In Belarus, the people rose up against their leader. All across the globe, as Roger often makes the point, there are uprisings. But why are we not advancing towards creating a new form of society? And again, the manifesto deals with questions, general questions of this nature. And the aim of it all is to create an alternative form of society. Just giving another illustration, the Irish Labour Party at its conference in 1969, a long time ago now, passed a resolution, this is a quotation from it, calling for a social revolution on a world scale. A social revolution on a world scale became the official Labour Party policy in Ireland. Today, Irish Labour Party gets 4% in the opinion polls. The British Labour Party carries through an immense change in society following World War II under the Attlee government, introducing the National Health Service, social welfare provision, nationalising huge swathes of industry. Yet there's a massive battle happening at the present time, not just in Britain between Labour and the Tories, but within the Labour Party as well. Another illustration of the failure of the past would be in the development of Stalinism. A huge advance was made for humankind in 1917, when the Bolsheviks took power in Russia in a democratic, through democratic organizations like the Soviets. Yet, by the mid-20s, all that had been undermined by the development of what we describe as Stalinism, where it involved repression. It gave socialism a terrible bad name and left a bad taste in the mouths of all the countries who had experienced that. And all of Eastern Europe was dominated in the interests of Russian foreign policy. It wasn't just that. It also extended to other parts of the globe where you had communist parties and communist influence acting to the against the best interests of workers. You had mass communist parties in Italy, in France, in Indonesia, which is the second largest communist party in Asia. All of that happened, and yet we still don't have socialism. We still haven't abolished capitalism with all these gains. And I mean, other mass organizations, I mean, obviously the Black Lives Matter is one, there have been many more across the globe. in the United States, there's a great history of revolt against oppression. In fact, the Communist Party in America was quite significant in the 1930s. But nonetheless, even the black struggles, people are struggling now for equality between black and white and against racist policies in America. Yet these issues have been raised a long time ago. I mean, Nat Turner led a revolt of slaves in the mid-19th century. There was a slave revolt in Haiti a few years after, at the close of the 18th century, a couple of years after the French Revolution. The first successful slave revolt in human history, where they won and they defeated the oppressor. Incidentally, I was in the United States a few years ago doing a tour of some of the Civil War sites, going down through all the main sites where the Civil War had been fought. And we'd go to occasional lectures or discussions or seminars about events. Not a single mention was made of Nat Turner, of Frederick Douglass, of Haiti, nothing. It was as if a bunch of nice white people decided, wouldn't it be good if we could make things easy for these poor black people? And when they were given these lectures and explaining what happened, nobody ever mentioned the fact that black people themselves rose up time and again, even during the Civil War. So the history of black revolt goes way back many years. And yet, here we are today in the States, fighting for the most basic human rights for black people. Now, that's what the manifesto is for, to try and aim the thinking, to analyze, to examine history, to look at the policies, look at why things didn't succeed in the past and what is needed to achieve success at this time. There's been some great revolutionary leaders amongst the black population in the United States. I've mentioned some obviously going back, but even in more recent times, people like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. By the way, Martin Luther King was invited to speak in Memphis, to speak to workers who were on strike in the municipal authority down there. That's the time he was shot. He was in Memphis to take part in a labor event, and he was shot. And he was moving in the direction of socialist thinking and uniting the working class around class issues. Malcolm X was moving in the direction of socialism. Fred Hampton, which Dave Buxton often talks about, and Carol, these were all great black leaders, but why is it the case that we still haven't resolved the problems? And like I say, the manifesto is there for the purpose of looking at that question. The historical lessons, the policies, all this has to be examined. And something else we need to examine as well is the fragmentation of the left, which has been a disaster. And again, it's not recent. This goes way back. The fragmentation of the left is nearly as old as the left itself. And at times when left-wing groups are beginning to move in the direction of mass support, they fragment. How do we stop that? And that requires analysis and examination from historical and political point of view. And the manifesto attempts to do that. Also, we have to unite workers across the globe. The Communist Manifesto, which was written in 1848, spoke about workers having no country, that the internationalization of capitalism means that the workers no longer have any need to support their own particular national interest. They can now unite on a global scale, and that point is made well in the manifesto document. We're talking about an international organization of workers with a common goal, which is the achievement of socialism. Capitalism, on the other hand, tries to divide workers. It tries to divide workers on racial lines, on the grounds of sex, on the grounds of nations, on the grounds of any kind of a way to divide workers would do. If you look at a map of Africa, North Africa, you see all the straight lines because the British and the French decided to carve up the region in their own interest. So Lebanon and Syria went to France, Iraq and Jordan went to Britain, Libya went to Italy, and so on. In Africa, Cormac knows far more about this neither, but in Africa, the various imperialist countries, Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, advanced into the continent as far as they could go, and then claimed that section of the country for themselves, creating enclaves and nations that cut across tribal divisions, exploiting one tribe against the other. It was always about division, always about exploitation, always driven by capitalist monopolies. That happened a long time ago. The Middle East was divided following World War I. Yet all the problems still exist. Now, how do we confront them? How do we deal with that on a global scale from an organizational point of view, and from a political point of view? the other divisions which they create still exist, as we know. And it's not just black and white in America. There's divisions between men and women. There's unequal pay was an issue that had to be combated. It's still an issue where the women's pay is lower than that of men on average when you work out the averages. But there was a time when women's pay was defined as being less than men. When I started working in England, there were two rates of pay. One was for women and single men, funny enough, and the other one was for married men. So it was divided between men and women. Different, the issue of marriage obviously isn't applied to women, whoever did that calculation. Ireland was the same. There was a European judgment in 1973 which forced equal pay in Ireland. It's a long time ago, but it had to be forced, and the government resisted it. And the European Union insisted that it had to be carried through. No, I'm not saying the European Union isn't of itself a progressive body. They have their own reasons for certain policies, but nonetheless, the Irish government resisted equal pay. So it's not that long ago when even pay was different. Now there's discrimination in other ways, and in addition to that is the hardship that women suffer in terms of domestic violence and so on. But the capitalists exploit any division they can find in society. And we endeavor to unite all the various forces in society around a single perspective and ultimately a single organization, which will be a socialist party. The manifesto in detail, if you look at the various things within it, it's not a program. The manifesto is not the same as a party program. The manifesto summarizes general issues and then gives a broad perspective. When I was looking at stuff before this meeting, I came across an interesting manifesto. It was the British Labour Party manifesto from 1974. Now, I'll just read just one piece from it. This is what it says in the manifesto. The Labour Party will bring about a fundamental and irreversible shift in the balance of power and wealth in favour of working people and their families. An irreversible shift. They reverse every single bloody thing that was introduced. Having said in the manifesto they'd make it irreversible, they reversed them all. They privatised, these are the Labour Party policies. They've privatised industry. They've broken up parts of the NHS for privatisation. They've removed schools from local authority, democratic control. So what they called an irreversible shift actually was all reversed, one after the other. So when these things are so obvious to anybody who thinks about them, why has society not changed? And the manifesto is aimed at that. What are the core points to get across in discussions and trying to convince people of the need to unite across national boundaries? I looked at the Black Panther had a manifesto. It's interesting, the issues that they were raising, things like housing for all, an education system, land, bread. They then called for full employment, guaranteed income, plus specific demands for Black people, such as issues about police brutality, which was raised clearly, and this is a long time ago. This was 1966. See, John Ryman is here. The Black Panthers were formed where he lives in Oakland. A long time ago, 1966. These are the demands. And what are we demanding today? An end to police brutality. So why is something that was demanded that long ago still an issue facing us today? And these are things that the manifesto tries to address. Another manifesto I looked at was in 1896. There was a group, Socialist Party group in Ireland called the Irish Socialist Republican Party. And James Connolly, commoners may have heard of, an Irish Marxist, was part of the foundation of that party. And the demands that they made at the time, the abolition of private banks, extension of nationalisation and public ownership, a free education system to the highest university level. We don't have any of these things. And that was called for a long time ago. And they seem very obvious things to do, but obvious that they may be, they're not happening. The Chartists had a manifesto, of course, but their main concern was for the parliamentary reform, universal suffrage, and abolition of the property qualification, things of that nature. So there's been demands made many, many times, but nowhere. But the manifesto that was drawn up in 1848 by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels for the League of the Just, as it was called then, and it was known as the Communist Manifesto, because the word communist had a different meaning, a different implication these days than today. And the word communist today is like a term of abuse. Even when you look at the origin of the word, it means communal and sharing, common ownership, solidarity. But the term has been devalued by the Russian bureaucracy and other people who use the word pejoratively like that. But anyway, a couple of quotations from the Communist Manifesto will illustrate where our manifesto is going. The Communist Manifesto says, the history of all hitherto existing society is a history of class struggles. Isn't that the case? Isn't that obviously the case now? When I was looking at the opening sentence of the manifesto, he spoke about a spectre is haunting Europe, and he called it then the spectre of communism. But there's a spectre haunting the world now, and the spectre is the absence of a mass organization of workers across the globe. That's what's facing us. This is the hurdle we have to face. That when we're dealing with these problems, we don't have a single organization in which we can all draw together around. The manifesto, 1848 manifesto, also says the executive of the modern state is but a cartel for managing the common affairs of the entire bourgeoisie. Isn't that not clear? David Hempson made that quotation in his document. Isn't it clear that that's the case? Just now, to get to our own manifesto itself, as I'm drawn towards a conclusion there. Firstly, revolutions are not brought about by revolutionaries. Revolutions happen when the mass of the people rise up against their conditions, be they economic, environmental, or whatever other issues are, division, sexism, whatever the issues are that annoy people and mobilize people. The revolution is only achieved when that movement of real people emerges. And what revolutionaries have to do is not create revolution. They don't create revolution. They have to steer and influence that movement towards an opposition to the capitalist system and try to influence the movement in such a way that instead of it emerging at various places and various times arbitrarily and uncoordinated, that it's drawn together with the object of overthrowing the capitalist system. So when the masses move into action, nothing whatever can stop the masses. The problem which we face is how do we unite the various struggles. Now, the difference between society today and in the past is that there's no loyalty to institutions anymore. The old loyalty, the easy growing up with certain young people today are different. In the past, you might grow up with a certain loyalty to your ancestors. You have certain choices, kind of a section of choices you picked from. That's all different now. There's none of that any longer. Now it's just chaos. You emerge into a society in which you're not guaranteed a house or a job or decent living standard or to be treated with dignity and respect. None of these guarantees exist now.
And you've had 20 minutes.
Oh, Jesus.
Okay.
Excuse me, comrades. I'm coming to an end then. So on the manifesto itself, just I'm not going to go through them one by one, but you'll see in the manifesto a summary of the points that I've been making here. The first points are about the purpose of the organization. This group here is to try and understand and explain to each other, because we're all involved, everybody's involved in struggle of various kinds, be it trade union struggle, struggles against racism, struggles in the Labour Party, struggles in the Mass Party, struggles in the Communist Party, wherever our struggles are. The job here is to try and integrate and draw together these things and try to learn lessons from each other through free discussion. This is one of the demands of the manifesto, free and open discussion, fraternal understanding. We couldn't possibly all have the same points of view. We all come from different backgrounds. But the idea is to share our experience and arrive at a common perspective and a common goal. And from that then comes the program. So we engage in political activity and we share that with our members. So it's an urgent question of what we're talking about here. Also, we have to support all the comrades who are engaged in struggle of any kind. We have to create and develop effective organizations in the various places in which we're engaged in battle. There's to be unity across the continents, not unity in every detail, but unity in terms of supporting the common struggle against capitalism. And ultimately, we're looking for a world socialist revolution and a worldwide socialist party encompassing every area of the globe and every issue of oppression and division and disunity which confronts workers and their families at the present time. I'm sorry I went over time there, Pam.
Yeah, it's okay. It's partly my fault for not telling you. Right, well, thanks very much, Finn. I mean, that's absolutely fantastic introduction to the manifesto. Just going on to the question of amendments, I think maybe the best thing to do is if the people that want to propose the amendments speak next, and then we discuss the whole thing together. Would that be acceptable to everybody? Yeah. So, okay, so I've noticed that Rob's amendment is related to Felicity's amendment, which is concentrating on the environment. So I suggest we take those two together. So if a man speaks first and then Rob and then Felicity speak, that's all right with everybody? Unless anybody's got any other suggestions about how we do it. Yeah, Roger, do you know if everybody's had sight of the amendment?
Everybody's seen Rob's amendments. Aman's only arrived yesterday and they have not been sent out. So,
all right, well, while we're talking,
I suggest
yeah.
the comrades in any case read out their amendments.
Right, I'll post them in the chat anyway, so people can look at them as well. So, Aman, can I invite you to, well, try and do it in 5 minutes if you can. If you need a minute or two more, that's okay, because there are quite a few amendments, aren't there? Yeah. All right, off you go.
Would it make sense, or would it make sense if I actually showed it on the screen and shared it rather than actually speaking it, so it reduces the possible confusion? Do you think?
Just do the comrades want that? I mean, I can post it in the chat as well.
Whichever is, I thought sharing it may make it easier to see where the changes are.
Well, Roger's put his thumb up, so that's one response. So yeah, stick it up there, and I'll put it in the chat as well.
Let me just go very briefly. I thought maybe it's easier if I call it by paragraph by paragraph. So paragraph 2, the one that starts with the rapidly accelerating concentration, I suggest we get rid of the word the liberation of world's resources by society and replace it by an end to private property. World resources are too general and vague, whereas end to the private property is a little bit more clear. Then going to paragraph 4, I suggest the reliance of capitalism to be changed to capitalism depends on exploitation of wage labor for its existence and on the ruthless practice of divide and rule. Otherwise, it seems that divide and rule is the major things, whereas the exploitation of wage labor is really the essential part. And I also suggest that we get rid of religion, caste, language, disability, sexual orientation, and just limit it to race, gender, and nationality, and every other conceivable. That would actually make it very focused and clear, and it will cover all of them. Paragraph 5, I suggest that we remove the end bit where it says it will guarantee equal rights for women and it goes for all people, etc. I thought the part about and for all people of ethnic group, religious affiliation, community, and sexual orientations could be deleted. So we only retain it will be guaranteed equal rights for women. The paragraph is majorly about the issue of women, so therefore it might actually end with that point. The rest of it is already in the manifesto. Paragraph 7, I suggested that we remove 2 main sentences. The bit that says what WIN strive to do, I think should be clear. So it doesn't need all of the sentence. We could say WIN endeavor to maintain. So this idea of strive to combat tendency of left wing, etc., is trying to say what WIN is not, whereas the manifesto should be clearly about what WIN is. So it doesn't need to have that experience. It could just say WIN endeavor to maintain unity. And the other sentence where it says WIN rejects the sectarian practices, I suggest we remove that as well. The 2 reasons for this. I understand the historical view of many of comrades who formed WIN comes from the idea of recognizing the splits, etc., in the left wing, which I think is throughout the world. But to actually say the left wing splits has been because of dogma and personal ambitions is not historically correct and is not correct everywhere. So the idea, I think, of saying that is true in some instances, in some parts of the world, and in some times, rather than actually saying this is the tendency of left-wing groups. After all, if WIN does become a left-wing group, if we think of it as that, it does actually could confuse the point. So we could simply just make it as what WIN is. So say WIN endeavor to maintain, and we don't need the second part in terms of the sectarian practices, because it's not only sectarian, there are many other practices that WIN is against, patriarchy, etc., etc. So that doesn't add value to the manifesto. So I suggest we remove that sentence too. We keep the rest of the paragraph. Paragraph 8, it says the work is international network. So far we refer to it as WIN, so I just suggest we change it to WIN. Under the banner of One World Party, I thought the idea of banner of the social revolution would make more sense. One world party is a little bit, or one single world party at the moment, maybe a little bit out of reach. So I thought the banner of socialist revolution would be sufficient. So we get rid of the word of one single world party of. Paragraph 9, I suggest we remove that completely and put something different, because it gives the impression as if the reason for the urgency of socialist revolution is today because of the extinction, whereas the urgency of socialist revolution has been there for hundreds of years. So I suggest we remove that and change it to something like this. Today, more than ever, the world needs a socialist revolution to rid itself of exploitation and rule of capital and its threat against the entire humanity, and for building a world worthy of human beings. Something like this actually tells us that socialist revolution is urgent, not because of possible threats, but because of what actually capitalism is and has done. And that keeps in touch with the same as the Communist Manifesto, which was referred to earlier. Last but not least, just the very, very last point is on paragraph 10 in list of the works. The only part where one has to do something, which is shown in here, is number 3. Now, in this one, there is a little bit of generality. I thought we could get rid of that. To make it easier, I suggest we change it to encourage in common political activity. We don't need to say as who, irrespective of whether one is individual or in groups. So it could get rid of that bit and make it easier to read. It would be engage in common political activity with all revolutionary progressive social struggles around the world. Now, this would carry the same meaning. Otherwise, it would give the impression that we would actually, or anybody would take part in any activity of any struggle of oppressed or marginalized people. Now, some of those activities may be very reactionary. It doesn't necessarily mean just because it's people who are oppressed, it does make it necessarily progressive. And that happens around the world a lot of times. So that's why I thought changing it would make it easier and would make it more clear. So it would read as engage in common political activity with all revolutionary progressive social struggles around the world, rather than specifically to people who are oppressed or marginalized, and also avoiding the issue of reactionary scenarios. That's all my comments. The parts about Rob proposals, I don't know whether you want me to comment on that now or whether you would rather me keep it for later. If I just may mention it, just one word. In terms of Rob's proposals, I suggest we do not include the first part where he looks for the assertion, simply because there is no reason why it highlights in such a manifesto only China as a second economy. First economy, EU, and everywhere else is part of it. Why pick up China on its own? And that gives the wrong impression in terms of the manifesto, in terms of its world approach. Brazil, Iran, and many other countries, capitalists are all the same, and US for that matter, and its political structure. And in terms of the amendment for the second part, I think it's a good idea to put COVID, but I wasn't sure whether it is something that one would have to have in a manifesto. Even the previous manifestos have not had it with regard to pandemics. Would it be something that would be considered as under health and environment or not? I'm open to listening to it, but I wasn't sort of the one I just say, yes, it definitely has to be in a manifesto. It could be an issue that could be raised rather than a manifesto point, because after all, COVID may pass in a couple of years and other pandemics may come in. That's it. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Aman. Hope everybody's been able to sort of follow that reasonably well. I think what I'll do now, I'll invite Rob to come in and comment. Perhaps you can say whether you accept what Aman says, or you want to leave your comment as it is, and then I'll just ask Felicity to come in because she's made a couple of points. So, Rob, are you ready to go now for 5 minutes?
Okay, thanks, Pam. The issue on China, the reason is that the manifesto as it stands talks only about the struggle against capitalism. Now, as our 2020 document, for instance, outlines, the struggle in China for democracy is, well, democracy and workers' control is going to be of fundamental importance. That isn't a struggle against capitalism, it's a struggle against a kind of brutal and autocratic bureaucracy. We could leave out the reference to China and talk about non-capitalist countries, but really when China is the main non-capitalist country in the world with the power of being the second largest economy, I do think there's a reason to mention it. So I would propose that the reference to China remains. Of the environmental issues, I do think I think that we must be kind of brutally honest about the history of the destruction of environments. That it was not only capitalism, that the Stalinist states of Eastern Europe and Russia, and also China, have wreaked devastation on their own environments. And I do think we need to be honest about this, because if we talk, for instance, to people in Eastern Europe and say it's capitalism that causes destruction to the environment, I think they will look at us askance and say, look, you know, what do you, we know all about destruction of the environment, and it's not capitalism. It's not only capitalism. So in the interests of both being honest and also being able to communicate with people who have experience of so-called socialist environmental devastation, I think we need to modify the references to capitalist economic destruction. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Rob. Felicity, do you want to come in on the, I think she's here somewhere, on the, you've added a couple of things in, haven't you?
Mine are not, mine are tidying up things more than in terms of the environment issues. And just to make it, you know, I was reading it as though I was one of the young people who is now, you know, fired up about issues around the environment, amongst other things. So calling ourselves eco-socialist is that's the way the youngsters at the moment prefer it to be. And I just see no reason to object to that. And then on the fourth, hang on, let me count it down, 1, 2, 3. The third paragraph, just to add, after worldwide against injustice and exploitation and environmental destruction, it's just putting, both are just putting the issues of environmental destruction slightly, you know, higher into the first stages of the manifesto. I'll talk about the women's things separately.
Okay, thanks, Felicity. Okay, so the three people who put amendments forward have explained why they want to amend them. Who would like to come in and comment on that?
Pam, I'd like to come in, please.
Yeah, go on, Jimmy.
The first thing is that I'm actually I'm delighted with the range and content of the amendments proposed and the brief discussion on it. But it's only a discussion on information that a lot of it has only been presented to me in the last 10, 15 minutes. I think bearing in mind the quantity and the separate items that have been discussed or have been suggested, I'd like to ask for consideration be given to reconvening the decision-making part of this meeting in about 2 weeks' time, to give us all a chance to have a look properly and discuss and understand. Some of Aman's stuff I agree with, some of it I don't. Some of it I don't understand. And I would rather have a chance than just simply on a take it or leave it basis to have an opportunity to try and understand what I support, what I don't support, and also to hear the views of other comrades.
Thanks, Jimmy. I mean, I think you have got a good point there. Some of the comrades don't have full sight to the resolution. So you know, can't consider it properly. Anybody else want to throw anything into the pot? Very right. Okay, Olivier, do you want to go next?
Yes, about the amendment submitted by Rob about China, I think the question under the amendment is the nature of China, and I don't think. Excuse me, I'm quite cold. The relative question is the nature of China. I think I would amend it, the Rob proposition as saying the second largest capitalist economy, and after the sentences to combat any independent political ideas, to add and any independent workers organization. But I think in the way is submitted the amendment about the environment question, about the so-called socialist destruction of environment. In fact, the debate is not about environment, but about the balance of the Eastern countries in Europe and in Asia during the 20th century. So it's a question with opening a large debate, and we can solve it now. We must stay at a point where we stand for equal rights for workers, freedom to organize for workers anywhere in the world, because I think we can't at this stage open a debate about the balance of the 20th century as a point of platform for our grouping. So I would recommend to put them aside due to the question involved by the amendment. Thanks.
Thanks, Olivier. Right, David, you were next.
Thank you. Well, first, I want to say I agree with Jimmy's proposal to not decide on this thing right away today, because there's a lot of things that need to be discussed. I thought the comrade from I think it was from Iran who had a lot of interesting points that I agreed on. But what I wanted to say is that I don't really support the amendment about climate, and because I think, and also a lot of the formulations also there's in the manifesto regarding the climate, I think they're dangerously influenced by these new youth movements for climate, like Extinction Rebellion or Fridays for Future or stuff like this. And I mean, when we take on, as Marxists, when we take on the issue of climate change, I mean, it is a super important issue for us, because I mean, there are two sort of antagonisms, or two I don't know how to call it in English, but there's two main fields of battle for Marxists. I mean, there's the end of oppression of humans over other humans, and there's also the liberation of humanity from nature, from the oppression of nature, if you so to speak. I think that's Engels who coined those things back in the days, and so it's a really important thing for us to engage in. But I think it's dangerous to speak in the terms of brink of extinction and things like this. I mean, human life is not going to go extinct due to climate change. Human societies and human civilization might collapse, but to speak about the brink of extinction, I think we're going too far the rhetoric of these groups like Extinction Rebellion and so on. I mean, my experience, because I was campaigning a lot about this 10 years ago when after Al Gore had his film back in 2006, we were campaigning a lot about these issues around the climate. And well, we were constantly in debate with these groups. They weren't called Extinction Rebellion then. They were called like Climate Action or Climax or whatever. I mean, these groups appear with different names at different times. But the problem was that they were speaking only about the threats. They were being annoying, like blocking roads, and people were just getting pissed off at these people. Instead of talking about, well, what can we do? And I visited, I think, like 3 or 4 schools in multiple classes with kids in age between 13 up to 17. And we were discussing both the threats and the possibilities. Like we can't say that untrammeled industrial development, so to speak. Yeah, that's true. I think a better way to put it would be that industrial development has made huge scars in the planet. But for us to heal these scars, we need to use in industry to heal these scars. We need to say that there's a huge need for green industrial sectors, such as like here up in Umeå in Sweden. To the north of here, there's one of Europe's biggest battery factories is growing up. And it's a way, I mean, it's going to create 3,000 jobs just in the factory. And there's at least 3,000 more jobs around the factory. I mean, it's a way of sort of combining the big struggle of jobs and with combating global warming and stuff like this. I mean, there are other things like the production of synthetic diesel, which is basically green diesel that can be pumped into into regular diesel cars seamlessly. Only it has 80% less emissions than regular fossil diesel, which is, I mean, it's going to be a necessity. There's 1 billion vehicles in the world. You can't just scrap all those 1 billion vehicles and replace them with electric cars like that. First of all, it's going to be an environmental disaster to create that many vehicles in such a short time. But it's much more efficient to try and lower the emissions of these cars. So, I mean, I think it's good. I mean, I agree with the fact that there needs to be a bit more about the climate change. But I mean, the problem with all of these Extinction Rebellion movements is they only talk about the threats. They don't talk about the solutions, and they don't give a role to the working class in this struggle for the climate. So and give the worker give industrial workers a role, and many times the environmental movement, they've sort of become, I mean, they've been clashing with industrial workers instead of working together with them. So I think, yeah, to end this, to sum this up, I mean, there needs to be a shift in the balance when it comes to climate change, because right now it's too much about extinction and stuff like this, which I mean, I don't believe it. I only believe we might collapse. There might be a collapse of human civilization, but extinction, I guess we'll have to wait for a rock from outer space to experience that. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Sorry, have you finished? Yeah. Yeah, that's great. It's obviously going to be a big subject. As I can see in the chat that people are putting all sorts of points in. And there's only other hand up at the moment. That's David Hempson. So I'm going to let David speak. And I think my proposal then that will be that we adjourn this particular discussion till the next WIN meeting. And in the meantime, we circulate the manifesto together with all the amendments. We also invite other comrades who want to make other amendments to come in, because I think the discussion we've had already has stimulated people to think about this issue. We'll just put something up in chat. Well, David's got his hand up. I notice Rob has now. Do the comrades want to carry on discussing this for now? Is what I need to know. Can you sort of just wave your hand if it's yes? Whether you want to carry on now or put it off to another time. Can somebody help me with looking at the screen? I don't see lots of people putting their hands up actually to carry on just now.
As the instigator of the nuisance, I would suggest that we carry on with the discussion, because the discussion itself is really what we need to hear.
Yeah, okay.
But it gives us a better opportunity to make the decisions. So I think it would be far better on just keep talking.
Okay, so are you proposing we sort of, rather than agree the manifesto today, we discuss it today, then we carry on and then we decide later on?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is carry on with the discussion on the document, on the amendments as we normally planned, but
right, okay.
that we defer the decision making to
right,
a further
fine.
meeting, giving us all
fine.
a chance to decide what way we want to support it.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah. All right, we'll carry on and do that. Some more hands going. We'll carry on for a bit. And see how it goes. And we might take a break again like we did last week. So I'm not expecting the final session will take too long, really. So if we carry on with that, with a view to, but I do propose that, you know, after today, we do circulate what we've got in our hands at the moment, and then we can carry on the discussion later. So, right, David Tempson, you've got 5 minutes if you want to come in now.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, look, I've got 3 points. The first is, you know, that which is relating to this discussion. I do think we need to pursue it a little bit further so that we get a clear outline, as we've had from David Kaiser, because there's so many Davids around and Daves, you know, who raised a whole lot of useful points. I disagree, but I do think we need to settle some of these points. That's the first point. The second is, how do we continue the discussion? I don't, you know, I propose a positive idea that we use the Facebook internal discussion, the Win Facebook, which we do use at times, but actually it's largely unused at the moment. And this is ideal because it's not too long, a document, and it allows a lot of interaction between comrades between now and the time at which we will finally make a decision. So I would propose that we put it up there after this meeting, because as we're talking, there are, you know, refined positions coming out. It mightn't be the ideal place, but at least it's not attaching emails which don't go anywhere and it's difficult to read and so forth. So, you know, that's the technique I would propose. And then finally, some points in relation to David Kaiser's points. First of all, you mentioned something like, what is it, 84 billion cars being dumped, and that would be a climate change disaster. I do think we're actually going to emancipate ourselves from cars. I do think we need to think of public transport in all kinds of ways in the future. And already capitalism is experimenting with forms of new kinds of intermediary forms of ownership of transport between public and immediately private, such as, you know, all the sharing mechanisms that are there right now, which are paid for. I'm sure that we'll come up with even better ideas to save the number of cars. The number of roads in society is terrible. I mean, we're wrecking our environment with all these roads. And if we could have more public transport, I'm 100% in favor of more train transport, for instance, which could speed up enormously the interaction between one city and another, and actually be a lot cheaper and actually get to the center of a city each time, which we would all love to do, rather than have long trips in and out from airports. So there's that point as well. And lastly, there's the point about Lucas Aerospace and workers' creativity. I'm all in favor of that. But I do think we need to be aware of some of the difficulties. I personally participated in the Luca Aerospace debate in Coventry when I was there in 1976, 77, I think, and 78. And the comrades there had some good ideas. One of them was, you know, a respirator, you know, like we desperately want right now, and that was a good idea. There was another idea about cars be able to ride on rail transport and then ride off and be on the road again. And there were a few others, and I would say the others were all non-starters, I'm afraid. I wish they weren't, but they were. So we need to have a debate along with some of the best scientific ideas and innovators, so that innovation shouldn't go to capitalism. It should go to social capital. It should go to the capital that we want to control, rather than towards the profit system as it does with the massive technology companies of the moment. Let me just stop right there. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That'll be a chance to come back in later if anything else you want to say. So I think Rob was next and then Felicity. Rob, do you want to come back in?
Okay, thanks. I apologize for coming in twice, but these points I'm making now are things that I've been concerned about for just about as long as I've been associated with WIN. To start off with, just looking at the reason for a manifesto, one reason is to remind ourselves of the basic principles, so that when we do have debates and discussions, it's always there to say, look, you know, this is what we want to do. But the main reason is really to tell potential members what we stand for. And so my question is, who are these potential members? In the list of the different struggles across the world, most of these struggles are not socialist struggles. They're not worker struggles specifically. They're anti-authoritarian, anti-corruption, and there's been a fairly minimal critique of the capitalist system. So a lot of the people, the vast majority of the people involved in these struggles have little knowledge of the history of socialism, socialist struggles, the principles and terminology. And I think we should make more of an attempt to speak to these people in their language, rather than the language that we've become accustomed to in our many years of socialist activism. I highlighted various points of terminology, but I won't go through them now. But my specific proposals is just to say a little bit more about what we mean by workers, because I think many people will not understand what workers are and what they aren't, and also the working class. Expand a little bit on socialism, not too much. There's not space to give a lesson on socialism, but a little bit more about what it means. And then expand, I think, quite a bit more on democratic institutions of power, to say specifically that the kind of parliaments that prevail throughout most of the world are not built really to reflect the wishes of the populations that they're meant to serve. So that's a fairly general point about the tone and language. Then there's quite a specific point that I want to raise, and that's about the orientation towards reformist organizations. This is I think it's a very important point. It's a point that's come up in relation to the Labour Party in Britain, and also to the Democratic Socialists of America and the USA. And I think that the manifesto should have something explicit that recognizes that there are many young activists who are attracted towards these organizations, and the people who've been leading them, for instance, Corbyn, Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, and also Black Lives Matter is one of the foremost examples of the kind of struggles that we need to, we have been making contact with, and we need to make more contact with. And I think there should be something in the manifesto that encourages WIN members to join these organizations or participate with other people who are active in these organizations. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rob. Felicity?
I wanted to speak on the women's part. I think we do need a longer discussion when it comes to the environment, the climate catastrophe part. But what I want to speak on is the women's part. Is that what you want to do, or shall I wait till people have finished discussing the environment one?
Well, there's no other hands up at the moment, so I think you might as well carry on.
Okay, right. So first of all, I think that in terms of principle and practice, a document about women should be written by women. And if only, you know, if we want a particular group of people to put something together that includes things about women, there should be a pre-consultation with women. I think that's just a basics. Nothing about us without us is really important. Secondly, I think that there are very, very live issues around the issues of women, or women's issues at the moment. Just what's going on in Poland at the moment, where, you know, the law has basically outlawed abortion altogether, and the women are on the streets fighting and fighting night after night after night about it. That happened in Argentina a couple of years ago, and now they've got the right. They've just won the right to abortion properly. But it's not just the issue of abortion. We also have to have the right for children to be supported by the society. We currently in Britain have this thing of the third child is entitled to no benefit at all, to discourage people from having children by starving a kid. And the level of poverty amongst children at this moment is unbelievable. So there's a consultant at the hospital in Liverpool, the Children's Hospital, Alder Hey Hospital, who is trying to get people to realise that there are kids coming in with such levels of malnutrition that they are going to be ill for the rest of their lives, and their life expectancy is going to be short. So, you know, as well as saying the right to abortion, we should say that children have the right to sustenance from the society. But the campaigns are not just about, from women, are not just about abortion. There's been mass movements and a big strike the year before last on International Women's Day on the issue of sexual violence and sexual assaults in the street. And that goes right across all the continents. Louise Harrison, who's a comrade of mine who runs campaigns on issues of domestic violence and women not having the right to anywhere to go, you know, the fact they can't even either chuck the partner out or find somewhere to go for safety at the moment because all the services have been cut. She set up a stall in the town in Doncaster and realised there was another stall a few yards down from a bunch of South African women who were involved in a South African campaign similarly, and they had an agreement in that organisation that if they left the country, they would then continue to fight on that issue because it's an international issue. And there's the issue, obviously, then of employment rights. In Britain, and I'm sure it's true in other parts of the world as well, the pandemic has put huge pressure on the whole social structure and made you see the social structure of the society and how necessary the work of women is. And now that if you look at, you know, academic reports, the database reports, they all imply it's a wonderful thing for women to be working in the labour force, but it's not done with any way of cutting any other workloads that women have. So we want to make sure that the hyper-exploitation of women and building a society that recognises the needs of children and recognises the needs of sections of society that need care, the elder care, the care of people who physically need help to survive. Those parts of women's lives and men's lives should be something that we're looking at, and it should come through the work that we do in women's groups, in women's campaigns, and then bringing it into the overall political issue. Because there is literally no liberation for women without changing the society. The society's got to change, got to recognise the work of women, got to recognise the needs of raising children, got to recognise the rights of women to control their own fertility and to be opposed to patriarchy and and what's happening in terms of sexual violence. And it is no accident that the attacks on the right to women's reproduction, the attacks on children's, the support for children, support for disabled people, support for the elders is in crisis at the moment, because capitalism at this moment operates on crude, primitive accumulation. It's based on robbing either the environment or robbing people, robbing anything to do with the community, trying to commercialize everything to do with the community, put a price on it. And the standard of living of certainly the British working class and the American working class has been forced down since the 1970s. And that has gone with further pressure on women and further increases in poverty on women. The classic one, I've got Pam's face in front of me when I'm talking as the main picture. And I know that this issue of women having been just robbed of years and years of pension is really important. And in Eastern Europe, it was used to be that under the Soviet regimes, it used to be that women would retire at 55 because that recognised that at that point in people's lives there were caring responsibilities. But that was a full pension to retire at that age. Now they're expected to work until 65 and do all the family responsibility work that they would do at that time. And it's a point of real anger there. So just to sum up, I think that the issues, the huge movements of women that have taken place and will continue to take place because of the pressure of hyper-exploitation, of the primitive accumulation, and the fact that these, it was mentioned in the lead-off, this tiny handful of men who own the wealth of the world have no respect for our children, for our elders, for the women, for any worker. And when we're saying this, we don't want to imply that men don't want to be involved in their families. One of the crises that we've got is that young men with young children are expected to work the longest hours, and that's got to stop. So the issues around women are crucial. It's really important that we recognise them. And in future, please, if there's going to be a document written, can the women be consulted?
Thanks, Felicity. There's no more hands up at the moment. You don't have to make a long speech. A quick comment or a question will be quite adequate, because what we need to be doing is having a discussion about this. Does anybody want to bring up anything quickly? They don't. I'll ask you in a minute, Dave, just see if anybody else. Just a sec. Right, go on, David, and then Davis has got
Dominic has his hand
for
up.
lots of time. Sorry, what did you say?
Dominic has his hand up.
Right, Dominic, can we
Committees
bring
like
you?
that.
Can we bring Dominic in next, because he's not spoken yet? Go on, Dominic.
I mean, quite simply, I'm getting a bit confused about what exactly we're going to write. What sort of a document we're going to go for, because there's a whole load of good points being made, and areas that need covering and areas that need expanding. But my view is that what we're writing is what we stand for. we're not going into all the detail on every subject. If we're going to do something on the environment, we should produce something on the environment. If we're going to do something about workers' alternative work, or whether cars are, can be replaced and all that, or the environmental issues and so on, you can expand the program within that document. But I think at the present time, what I would think we're looking at is, how do we approach people who are not used to the ideas of socialism, not used to the ideas of Marxism, to a broad outline of what we stand for, and something that we can show in a fairly brief statement of a page, 2-3 pages, and use that as the basis. Because I think this discussion today, I was thinking, well, how long is this going to take? Because if somebody puts up an amendment, is somebody going to put an amendment to the amendment? Yeah, I think that the statement as it stands is more or less okay. And I think we need something like that to say basically where we stand. And I think in the future, as things develop, as things change, and we're talking about a lot of things that are relevant to today, that in 2 or 3 years' time, something else might be totally relevant and not what we're talking about. And if we've got a manifesto talking about things that are fixed today and not relevant in the future, it's out of date. So I'm a bit confused, and maybe my points I'm making are a bit confused, but I think we need a brief-ish statement about what we're about, and therefore where we go forward. And I thought the statement, when I read the manifesto, the original document, more or less it's okay. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Dominic. Yeah, I think when we go back to this discussion, we need to do it in a more structured way. It's a bit confusing if you've not got the resolution and the amendments in front of you, but we should be able to return to that. Right, I can see Davis and David Hempson had his hand. Is there anybody else that wants to come in, because they've spoken already? Quick question, comment, anybody? Right, I'll let Davis sit. I think Davis spoke before. Santana, you've got your hand up. Do you want to go next?
I think the manifesto is a broad statement aimed at both deepening and broadening the envelope. That's how I understand it. In that sense, I think what Roger said epitomized it, that this is a lot of patience in which this has to evolve and be attractive to all the people who want to join in and widen the envelope. Having said that, what I find missing is people like us are activists and we work on the ground. We don't get into all that other stuff. We are not getting a hang of it. And let me tell you in 2 ways why I think so. I think what the manifesto is missing is the philosophical dimensions. In a world that is so rapidly changing, and the philosophical drivers that made us for socialism or Marxism, I think there's something which is missing there. And I would much appreciate that. We can consider that. Let me tell you, to back that with 2 inputs. One is, look, all the gains that we have struggled and won for the workers, we are seeing it going out of our way in our own existential reality. We can't take that pain. We really can't take that pain. All that gains that we did, this, that, the other is happening. At least in India. I come from India, and therefore I'm trying to. So therefore we don't see the scope to further the agenda unless we change the language of our conversation and become more sort of relevant and real, etc. And I'm just talking at the programmatic level. I'm not talking at the manifesto level. Now, we can talk saying it's not socialism only, it's not workers international only, it's about a social revolution centered on the working class and a socialist society. Now, where are we going to anchor then in terms of the philosophical dimensions of it? Do we understand autonomy do we understand austerity? If environment is being talked here, I would say, as India, we think, or I think, that it is a failure on the austerity level, whatever problems it may be. And then what is missing in the globe today, at least where we are working, is of confidence and self-image. And I think, therefore, I would strongly request Roger and David and Rosendale too to think that, look, people get inspired under a framework which is not just a set of beautiful words, but a set of, something which says, here, man, this is the world we want to build. That's what I would say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Santana, for that. Comitel, I think you're next. Brilliant, thank you.
Sorry, good afternoon, everyone. I just have a word because I'm not sure, because I was listening to these Brazilians. They are like socialist, but they were talking about how the socialist regime has changed since the, because he was talking about China, because China is a socialist, communist, has a socialist regime, but is a capitalist, whereas Cuba is a socialist, but the problem, and even Venezuela is a socialist. So I want to understand. I know that they have some embargoes in economy, but seems like they cannot progress. I was wondering why, how can we solve this problem? Because if a country decides to go against the capitalism, they're going to be put out of the business. They are not going to be able to operate, and then the people is going to suffer. For instance, in Brazil, we PT, the Partido dos Trabalhadores, the Workers' Party, is a democrat socialist. Why? Because they want to use the capitalism to put the people in a budget. For instance, let's say if they build more university since Brazil was discovered, all right, and they gave more rights since the revolution that we had, 1988, in the Constitution. The workers got a lot of rights, but they were able to, it was written in the law, but just when PT went to the power, that's when they managed to put this in place. But since 2016, we had the coup. So everything that they managed to put up, to give it to the people, more opportunities, more jobs, more education, more health, because even then, back in 1988, we didn't have this like NHS here. We have the SUS in Brazil that is just like NHS. But since the coup, now they are taking the money. So the capitalism goes to these countries and try to infiltrate. They make coups, and then we are now able to continue our revolution, our socialist democratic. So I want to understand better, how can we build a socialism with America? They come up and they make coups in that country, and the people suffer, like Cuba, Venezuela, countries like that. I don't know. Brazil didn't suffer as much, but they suffer in the other way, because we have corrupt governments that accept the offer from America, and they help, America help the corrupt Brazilian to put people that work for them, to help them. They go there, they get our petroleum like the pre-salt that we discover. We managed to find petroleum under the sea. We built the machine to go between the ocean to get the petroleum. And now who has the petroleum? United States, England, and all these big companies. So how can, I mean, I don't see how we can do this.
Thank you, Kamit. Sorry, I apologise, I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Right, I'm going to bring Davis in next. Kamit's asked a few questions, so maybe one or two comrades could have a think about giving her a response to that. So, Davis, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Just first, I don't remember which comrade it was. I think he was named Dominic. You made a good point. This is a manifesto that should be short, and in that way is a bit, not in depth in all of these issues. Just two comments. One about the climate there. I completely agree with, I think it was David, one of all these Davids here, who spoke about public transport. I mean, it was interesting during the climate summit in Copenhagen in 2009. It was one of the major sort of breaking points before we split off from the CWI, because they were only hanging out with the tree-hugging, sandal-wearing hippies who were around the conference center, while, I mean, and some of us who later left and created the Workers' Party group, we instead tried to speak with sort of local Copenhageners about the need for public transportation. I mean, it's a huge issue, especially in China, where there are so many cities with over 1 million people that it's amazing. I mean, before the coronavirus and the pandemic, myself, I had never heard about the city of Wuhan, and it's a city of millions, and there's a dozen of those cities, even more in China. So public transportation is a super important thing. But on one hand, on the other hand, there are still 1 billion vehicles in the world. So there is a need to make those more environmentally friendly. But I think my main point is that we need to, when it comes to the climate, we shouldn't be just the bringers of the bad news that humanity is on the brink of extinction. We need to put forward instead that what are the possibilities, something that people should fight for. That's not huge. It could be small as well. And public transport is one of those things. I mean, if you live in a normally sized city, that's something to fight for. The other thing that I was thinking about more generally about the manifesto, and I have to admit I haven't read it super clearly, but I think there is, there should be something about how because there's a lot about the left-wing groups and stuff like this, but perhaps there should be some space left also for criticizing, the big reformist workers' organizations such as the Social Democracy here in Sweden or the Labour Party, and how they have sort of they have what's it called? They don't put forward an independent working class position. They are just following the basically the liberal bourgeoisie around. Whatever the liberal bourgeoisie puts forward is what the broader labor movement in Europe and other places is doing. So, perhaps it doesn't have to be long, but there's something about this probably should be mentioned in this manifesto. Thank you.
Thanks, Davis. I've no hands up at the moment. David Hempson, did you have your hands up to come back in?
Yeah. Look, you know, this is a fine discussion, and I think we're all gaining a lot from it. But the problem is how to take the stream of ideas and consciousness, if I could put it that way, into different furrows, or, you know, where does it go? And I don't know if comrades have read some of the correspondence of Marx, but, you know, he was being chased all the time to come up with a Communist Manifesto, and he wanted to have longer time to do it. And so we need to be economical in what we do. At the same time, we shouldn't really reject any of the good suggestions which are being made right now for taking up those issues, reflecting on the manifesto itself, which we should probably set a word limit so that we know what we're dealing with. We know we've got to be economical. And at the same time, how we develop different streams of discussion. And I'm picking up, particularly from Felicity, who's made some excellent points, that we need further discussion of the women's question. We've had a lot of discussion in relation to the question of women in struggle, and there's been very lively discussion. We haven't had so much discussion, although Felicity has contributed valuably in this way, in terms of raising more theoretical issues, you know, in relation to women and the rise of patriarchy, women's subjugation in the past and so forth, and we all need to learn, you know, from that. But I don't think it necessarily means that we shouldn't conclude a manifesto while that discussion is in place. If it really is so radically different, we can amend the manifesto at some future point. But I'm not so sure about it. I think we do need a very thorough discussion of the women's question, because anywhere you look in the world, it's women in leadership of a struggle, even if it's a national or a democratic struggle. Poland has been mentioned. If we look at Africa, there's not one African country which has not had an uprising by women in the past period. And it's a quite extraordinary event. I don't think we've seen anything like this in world history before. And it gives another dimension to the points which Roger's made in terms of the rise, you know, of opposition. So what I would say is that we should work economically using the Facebook internal page to cover the gaps between our one discussion and another. And then we should identify those questions which we should take up in future discussions in the way in which we look at issues. I think we want to have a thorough discussion on women's question. We need discussion about race and society, possibly. I'm just raising it. We certainly need a further discussion about the pandemic. We have hardly mentioned so much about the pandemic and climate change. I think we have only just explored some of the ways, not only in which the nature of climate change, but also the way in which we present ideas so that we're not completely antagonistic to the position of workers who are entrenched in such sectors as the coal industry. I can mention that we have had a participant in the past, Wim Dekkers, who has written extensively on the question of decoaling society. In other words, closing down the coal mines of Holland and providing alternative employment for many men who were involved in such production. And we could learn enormously from the book that he wrote on that question. He has made an offer on that. So in other words, we could continue the discussion in a very constructive way in those dimensions. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I can't see any other hands up at the moment. Oh, Rob, did you want to come back in briefly? Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly. I don't think we're going to have. Well, if we still stick to our plan to use these discussions to arrive at an agreed manifesto, we won't have time to go into detail into all the different theoretical discussions. What I suggest is that we, unlike Marx's manifesto, we can regard this manifesto as renewable and changeable, and come up with a manifesto now, and then look at it in a year or 2 years' time, after we've had some of the discussions which have been discussed here, because really to do justice to these discussions, I think we'd need to spend quite a few dedicated Zoom meetings. And possibly the best way forward, maybe have some initial discussions, but then to have a drafting committee that pulls the ideas together, comes up with a draft, maybe with a few reasons why these ideas were included, these ideas weren't included, and then put those forward for a final approval.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Right, I think we've come to the end of the discussion at the moment. There's no more hands coming up. My proposal now is we adjourn this till the next regular WIN meeting and we continue where we left off. And in the meantime, sorry?
I think Jabu's.
Oh, is Jabu trying to speak?
Hand in the chat.
Oh, right, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I've put it a couple of times. But...
Sorry, Jabu, I've just not seen it. Right, is there anybody after Jabu, or is that it now? Yeah, nobody's shouting at me. Jabu, do you want to go in the... Yeah, okay, Jabu and then Janet. Go on, Jabu.
Yeah, no, I won't take too long. I just wanted to basically say something. I think somebody talked about not reaching out to certain working classes and what is working class. I think I picked up on that. I've just come back from a Socialist Health Association meeting, which was quite big in Oxford. And one of the things that was also prevalent was people kind of trying to relate to who are the working classes that have massively voted for the Tory party right in the north and that sort of blue sea where people have really kind of sort of disassociated themselves from the labor movement. It was really, really interesting in terms of how people just basically, because this was mostly based on the health inequalities, how people were looking at their health and looking at the way that the despondency, the culture of despondency in their communities. One of the things that I want to use to come forward as a quotation was a study done in Glasgow, where some people, when they went in to talk to some of the working class areas and said to people there, why are you smoking? Why are you not worried about your health? And people said, the answer from one of the people said, look around you, what have I got to live for? And as this person was kind of relaying this story, I remember growing up in South Africa where politics was spoken of in buses, in taxis, everywhere you went. People were discussing the state of what was going on in South Africa. This was during the mass democratic movements that were fighting to overthrow apartheid. And the relationship with living in the UK and kind of sort of looking at the two paradigms where I am always distributing food, people are worried about poverty and trying to survive, and them relating politics to elections. The only time that they think the politicians know us is when it's during general election. And yet, if you say, what about relating to your lives in terms of the political scene, as far as, for instance, the pandemic has shown, has really what you call showed put racism on the agenda, because it has shown that some communities are living in rough areas. They're living in poor housing. They're living in poverty. They are at the top of the health inequality graphs. So it was really, really interesting to have that perspective as far as understanding who the real working classes are, the working classes that are used to polarize our communities, where people are being pitted against each other, to actually look at migrants as people that are taking our jobs. That is why we are unemployed. This is, the scapegoat culture as it is. So I just wanted to make a comment on that, to say, for somebody to talk about how do we reach the working classes. One of the things also that we're doing in Oxford, which is quite interesting, every time we have these chats, we try and pull in the organizations that exist in Oxford, who are mostly sometimes structured around working, embedded around working classes, to say, yes, we've got the support from the Oxford Black Coalition, we've got support from the African Heritage, we've got support from the Mothers for Justice Ubuntu. And that is always a way of showing this solidarity with what is going on in the area. And we do need to put a lot of work into organizing these communities. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jabu. Right, I'll bring Janet in. I think Janet is the last speaker in this session. Then we'll have a short break. Then we'll move on to the second item on the agenda. So, Janet, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks,
fire
Pam.
away?
I'll be really quick. I know people are desperate to get to the bathroom. I started articulating something in the chat, and I realized through this discussion that this is something that is of enormous concern to me, moving back into socialist politics after a long break. The need to articulate a vision of socialism that isn't enthralled to Victorian notions of progress, growth-centered, productivist, and recognizes that we live, inside and in concert with this ecological fragility, limited resources. And I think that, Marx wrote his manifesto from inside that Victorian notion of growth-centered productivism as being the way to progress the conditions of the working class. And I think this is a fundamental discussion that we need to have. And I've heard a number of people talking about, appealing to the youth. And if we elide or glide over this question of our relationship to the environment, or we just reproduce the old Victorian notions in that regard, then I think we have lost them before we even start. They'll recognize it. So anyway, that's it.
Thanks very much, Janet. Right, so I intend to call a break now.